Joining us now, Fresno State play-by-play man Paul Loeffler on the Deseret First Credit Union Hotline. Paul, welcome to BYU Sports Nation.
Hey, thanks for having me on, guys. Yeah, Greg's pulling a doubleheader tomorrow. That's pretty impressive, man.
Yes, he
Hopefully
is.
he doesn't get stuck in traffic in my hometown going through there.
If that game goes into OT, I'm worried for him.
Yeah, that's all you need is the Scott Sterling Studio C shootout at the end of that one.
Very nice pull, Paul.
Yes,
Very
Paul.
nice pull.
Well done. Hey, to you, what is the most interesting part about tomorrow night's matchup between BYU and Fresno State?
I guess momentum. You look at Fresno State and the team that people had very low expectations for this year, and then Jeff Tedford comes in, and all of a sudden these guys are executing in incredible fashion, dominating the line of scrimmage, shocking a lot of people by going down to San Diego and pummeling the Aztecs, and everything's going their way. And then they lay an egg last week against UNLV. So people are saying, well, which team is it? Who's going to show up? And then you've got the Cougars, who played one of the toughest schedules in the country and dealt with all these injuries. And now maybe they're getting healthy at just the right time. So I think this is one of those games that it's really hard to figure out going in, and you wonder who's going to get that first real break in the game and maybe be able to pick up momentum and roll from there.
Fresno State is really impressed us this year for all the reasons you've mentioned. Before last week, the only losses were at Alabama and Washington, two playoff teams from last year, which is pretty wild. Then the UNLV game happens, and to me, that's the best and worst thing that could have happened for BYU, because now Fresno State's on high alert, yet the blueprint for maybe how to compete with Fresno State is out there. So kind of what happened last week in that game against UNLV?
Well, you talk about that, the blueprint, and I'm privileged to be able to call these games with Pat Hill, who was a phenomenal coach here for 15 years and just understands the game and can break it down and sees things coming before they happen. And one of his concerns all season long has been, if a team is patient in the run game and goes right at Fresno State, how are the Bulldogs going to handle it? And we saw San Diego State do that on the opening drive of the game, but then the Bulldogs forced a fumble in the red zone, which really turned that game around. And no one had really been able to follow that strategy effectively until UNLV last week, and that's what they did. They ran the ball straight ahead. On third down situations, they had big receivers who got to the sticks and made contested catches, and they controlled the clock. They kept the ball away from Fresno State, which is what the Bulldogs have been doing to other people. This time they got a heavy dose of their own medicine, and it was tough to swallow. And that made it a game in the fourth quarter, and that's when the Bulldogs were opened up to a situation where if you make a mistake, you're going to pay for it. And they did. They muffed a punt. They snapped a punt snap over the punter's head. Those were two critical mistakes late in the ball game that really, I think, swung it toward UNLV.
You brought up Jeff Tedford and how he has switched things around literally in one season. We're talking about a football team that couldn't get anything going last year, and now they're 5-3 and feeling good and beat up on a good San Diego State team. Where has he made the biggest impact, and how has he done that?
Yeah, it's a good question, because I don't think a lot of people thought he could turn it around that quickly. But I think it starts with an expectation of success. It starts with a standard that he sets. He believes he has a blueprint for doing it. There are things that they have to do every day, those details. If you take care of those details, it's all going to add up to something that you like. He demands execution. He demands hard work. I mean, the players, when they come off the practice field, they can't walk off the field. They've got to have those knees up and at least look like they're running until they get completely off the field, and the coaches too. So he has that standard running from top to bottom in the program. And, I think he's gotten these players to believe in it. He's got a phenomenal coaching staff with some real good experience, some energy, guys who have the fundamentals down to teach positions, who work together well. They're all on the same page, which is such a critical component of coaching that a lot of people overlook. If you don't have assistants that are following the game plan or in lockstep with you, it's going to be hard. So he's got that. He also has done a great job in recruiting, and he's emphasizing this local area around Fresno that really has people invested. Marcus McMahon was a godsend at quarterback to get him when they got him, and what he's brought to the table. But I think the biggest answer to that is Jeff Tedford brought a plan, and this program has executed that plan.
The quarterback, Marcus McMahon, was at Oregon State when Kalani Sitake was the defensive coordinator. Elias Tuiaki was there as well for BYU. He's throwing 64% completion percentage this year. What are his strengths at quarterback?
Well, I'd say a couple of his strengths. Probably the ones that you see the most. He throws a really good deep ball, and that's something that's been missing here really since Derek Carr left. I mean, Chasen Virgil started most of last year, and he started the first 3 games this year, and he just never had that accuracy on the deep ball that McMahon has. Marcus is a tremendous athlete, too, who's not afraid to run. He shows some speed. I mean, they had a quarterback draw on 3rd down a few weeks ago. He ends up going 57 yards. He can do that. I think most impressively, he's had, for the most part, that comfort in the pocket, that he can feel it. He can slide and he can glide and he can keep a play alive and find the open man. He's been very accurate. There have been a couple games where he started out completing his first 8, 9, 10 passes of the ball game. So all those things come into play for McMahon. He's got the experience of starting in the Pac-12. He started Oregon State's last 6 games last year. He led the Beavers to wins over Oregon and Arizona at the end of the year. So he's been in those battles. He's not fazed by what he's up against. And that's what we said about him. He was undefeated as a starter until last week, and that was the first time that some of that shine came off in that 4th quarter against UNLV, and particularly when the Bulldogs were behind late and trying to come back. He had some of his most disappointing moments. So I think this is a big outing for him, especially because of his familiarity with Coach Sataki and some familiar faces on that Cougar sideline, to step up and say, you know what, I do have the ability to pull this off, and even if it's a game in the 4th quarter and we have to come back, I'm going to lead this team to victory. So this is a big put-up or shut-up moment for Marcus McMahon.
Fresno State play-by-play man Paul Loeffler with us on BYU Sports Nation. Well, it always helps a quarterback when he knows he has a great defense, and Fresno State certainly has that, Paul.
And that has been the biggest revelation this year, because the defense the last couple of years really struggled. And, you know, you always have that caveat, well, how much is the defense and how much of it is an offense that can't stay on the field and is hanging the defense out to dry? And we certainly saw that dynamic the last couple of years. This year, I think you see the opposite. You see an offense that's controlling the clock and keeping that defense rested and fresh. You see a defense that's executing, that's staying assignment perfect. And guys who were okay players a year ago are outstanding players this year. No one personifies that better than the middle linebacker, Jeff Allison, who's just having a phenomenal sophomore year and was arguably the best defensive player on the field either way in that game against Alabama. And you have to give a lot of credit to the coordinator and to Jeff Tedford for hiring him, because, you know, I think the book would say, well, you go find a defensive coordinator who's had success at the college level, or a position coach from a Power 5 program who's ready to take it on. Where did Jeff Tedford go? He went to Canada. He had that list. And, you know, when he coached in Canada, there was a defensive coordinator who just gave him fits. And so, you know, he calls up a guy he barely knew out of the blue, Orlando Steinauer, says, hey, I want to talk to you about Fresno State.
Yeah.
He ends up bringing him down here to California, and that defense has done a phenomenal job.
Great stuff, Paul. We appreciate the time, and see you in Fresno tomorrow, man.